There's just so much happening and going on, and funding, mostly one time, available across the state. How, particularly does an education leader, in the midst of, you know, mask mandates and teaching kids at home and all of the other things that many of you in this room have been dealing with for the last 2 years, even begin to think about, how do I utilize this funding effectively? And so when we came together, our goal really was to hear each other, to think about how do we take these initiatives and make them digestible, although we all had this goal of a 30-page document, and I think it's 100 pages, with many, many links, but, so definitely go online to read it, rather than just print it out.
We're going to do an executive summary.
Oh, we're going to do an executive summary.
We got more to go.
But it really offered us the opportunity to hear from each other, to talk about, well, wait a minute, we forgot about that particular group. We still left, you know, the view of some organizations and sectors out of this. There's no question. We started this, I think we hatched this idea in September. And so you can see it's taken a lot of time, weekly meetings with many of us, and lots of iterations and conversations to make it all happen. The general structure of the guide is an overview of looking at the framework that you use, and then deeper dives into these different initiatives with details on where the funding's coming from and how it's coming down. There's a very robust appendices at the end that literally has a chart that shows all of the various different funding, who it's going to, how it can be used. So there is an enormous wealth of information in this guide. And it goes without saying, part of the purpose and the reason we did this was because we all want to focus on one child and not be trying to figure out where is this child getting other services, but really try to utilize this moment in time where there is a focus on schools being the place where services can come together and be delivered, and supporting educators and their partner organizations in figuring it all out. You've heard this probably already today, but these investments there are dollar signs here. Melissa talked about the $4.4 billion in the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. There is in excess of $12 billion invested through various education, health, and social service programs through the Budget Act, with a real emphasis, again, on equity and really trying to target services for children with higher needs. The investments have been designated for multiple different sectors. Again, why it is so critical that we are all working together. We have to think about the policy development that has to happen not just at that state level to break down the silos between the state agencies, but also how does that translate locally, right? How are you all talking to your partners on a local level? Because you're not going to get something done if you're not in partnership with the Behavioral Health Department, with the Social Services Department, with education, all working with First Five. There's so many. I was amazed when Daisy and Lalo said they have 102 organizations in their network. I mean, like, that's how it should be, right? That's what it takes. And as we all know, because we're here talking about it, there's a lack of connection among organizations at the state, regional, local levels. So goes without saying, money can't do it alone. You all know that. I'm sure many of you have either been or are in connection to an educator who goes to thrift stores and finds things because that's the way they get it done for kids. And these are the things that the field guide is aiming to do: make the case for integrated school-based systems of care, describing the key initiatives, and supporting LEAs with strategies for sustainable funding pathways. Again, educating you on things you already know here, but public education largely reflects a decentralized structure. It's informed by historical development, democratic principles that emphasize that local control. Health and Human Services is very much more centralized at the state level and at the county levels. So when you're trying to get these systems to work together, you really have to understand kind of where the nexus is, where do they start, where are they controlled, in a sense, but then how does that translate when you're coming down and working with kids and families? I'm going to hand it over now to Lupita.
Good afternoon. I'm Lupita Alcalá. I'm with West Ed. I'm the Director of Education Policy and Outcomes, and I had the privilege to work with these folks and many others. And I just have to do a shout out to Marianne and Ruthie and our team, Natalie and Amber, for all their support as well, who are here today. So just a big shout out. This is a major team effort, not only within agencies, but across many agencies. And just to reiterate where Chris just left off, I come from primarily the education sector, and as you know, it's very decentralized. There's 1,000 school districts, 58 counties, 10,000 schools, 6 million children up until recently. I think there's 5,900,000 now. And so it's incredibly decentralized. And then the charge really is, how do you connect health and human services agencies and services that are primarily centralized with a decentralized system? And so really this integrated care guide helps to make those connections that are so necessary to provide school-based services on campuses and with local regions. And so streamlining not only funding collaboration amongst education and healthcare agencies and organizations, and facilitating the development of necessary, and I'm sure we've said this here before, trusting relationships is key, right? So I wanted to just emphasize that. So the way the guide is made up, and I don't know if someone can be a Vanna White here and like hold one up. The way the guide is broken up is in Chapter 1 is really introduction and vision. Like we said, it's really the key frames is around the whole child approach, an integrated school-based system of care and cross-sector collaboration, really meeting the needs but not of children, but not in silos, and how important a culturally responsive approach is. Super important. Also, the context. We just talked about the amount of money. The initiatives that we chose really were not all largest investments, but a lot of them were. Community schools at $3 billion, and children and youth behavioral health initiative, $4.3 billion, not to mention expanded learning, that is an annual appropriation of $1.7 billion, plus a number of other expanded learning efforts due to COVID. And so all in all, it's more than $10 billion to provide comprehensive health and wellness and services and to all. So in chapter 2 includes the 6 key initiatives, which is the Adverse Children Experiences ACEs Aware Initiative, includes behavioral health initiatives, children and youth system of care, community schools, early childhood initiatives, and expanded learning. And we chose those 6 because they had a connection, and we'll kind of share a little bit about that connection in a minute. The chapter 3 is about funding strategies for how to fund various components of an integrated school-based system of care, and we do this compilation of funding sources as well to help describe all the different resources that are available. And then chapter 4 is really guidance to the state, recommendations for how the state leaders can support local cross-sector collaboration by modeling, here at the state level, cross-sector collaboration at the state level in order to reduce the current barriers that LEAs face. So often, a lot of these funding and administration reporting goes down to the locals, and we say, you know, you all need to figure that out. But what we need to do is up here at the state level is to really help integrate and collaborate and streamline so that you're able to use the funding and not have to report it in 10 different ways, and not only report it but account for it, and perhaps they have some nuances to what the requirements are. And then I'm going to come back up a little later to really talk about how these, once my colleagues speak about going a little deeper into particular sections of the guide and the subject matter, I'll talk a little bit about how these connections are made in a graphic that is on a little later in the presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, Children and Youth System of Care. And that would be Richard and Hayin?
Must be me. Gotta get to the gym. All right, so I know that the guide is circulating, old school, passing it around, so you'll get a chance to, hopefully get a chance to put hands on for just a moment or two. And we don't have time today to highlight each and every one of the elements of the field guide, but we wanted to, I think, just spend a minute or two diving deep by way of examples of what you'll find there. And one of the areas we wanted to highlight is the children's system of care work. You heard about it from Clara a little bit, and Ken referenced it this morning. And so feel free to advance that for me, or shall I advance my own?
I got it. Dana, got it. Did I go the wrong way?
The other way, yeah. Advance the other way.
Sorry.
Retreat, yeah.
Got it.
One of the unique aspects of Assembly Bill 2083 is that the Memorandum of Understanding is rooted in research on collective impact and wraparound outcomes, and it identifies 8 or 9 critical functional threads that collective efforts have to do sustainably in order to reach impact. And on the screen you see highlighted all 11. Now the state added, when the legislation made its way through the process, the state added a couple things that are not rooted necessarily in research, but they were intended to support the effort. And I have highlighted here elements 1, 3, and 9, because my bias again is, and I think the research would support this, that all of the other initiatives and the opportunities that we have in this momentous, extraordinary opportunity in California are deeply dependent upon the functional relationships that are built underneath these 3 premises. Is there a backbone organization that can contain it and serve as a design, planning, oversight body, if you will? Can we address the significant gaps in healthcare and educational information privacy navigation? If we don't do that, then nothing works well. You all experience that on a daily basis, right? And if we can't maximize the financing opportunities to sustain it, then all we're doing is we're stuck in this 3-year cycle of short-term funding over and over and over again, which I would point out for a moment, not to pontificate too much, is a death spiral. Because if you've ever budgeted the county system, if you begin to replace your endowed funds, your long-term entitlements, with short-term monies, and that's a gravitational process that happens sometimes when you're not even aware of it, like over a number of budget cycles. If that happens, you're going to end up 10 or 12 years down the road with little to work with, because the one-time funds will at some point evaporate. It's inevitable, right? These funding cycles that we experience in public services. So this third piece, this blending of financial architecture, if you will, is critical to any sustainability effort. So the system of care, again, is intended. Think of it, we're rewiring, right? So it's a blueprint If you had an electrician that was coming to your house or your building to rewire your house, he'd have a schematic of where the switches and the light fixtures and the pole, where the load was going to be needed in the home electrically. And that's what the MOU does. It's a blueprint for how you rewire, if that makes sense. Next slide. Just for a moment or two on reflecting on the fact that the interagency leadership team and the MOU is really intended also to support the ability of the interagency collaborative to focus on implementation at the multiple levels. So sometimes in government, when we're honest and self-critical, we can say, well, we do policy work really well. And we can get our management people together to talk about what that should look like. And we can translate the policy at the county level. But more often than not, I think our outcomes suggest that there's a breakdown somewhere between that process and the outcomes that the funding and the policy are intended to support. And so the MOU, again, if it's well done and well executed, not just words on paper, but if you bring your collaborative together consistently, regularly, more than once a quarter, you can attend to these functional areas in such a way that implementation of your reforms, whether it's community schools or school-based health incentive program or CalAIM or FFPSA, whatever it is, you can attend to the implementation and the oversight in a collective environment, right? You can attend to implementation at all levels so that you actually get to community where the impacts actually happen, because that's where kids and families get services. Next. And with appreciation to our friends at the Department of Developmental Services that helped me with this graphic for some other utility, it's just a quick look at how, if you're a visual processor like me, the system of care can function as a conduit or a container for the other reform efforts. If you'll use that ILT and the Memorandum of Understanding as intended, then you get a vehicle, a method, a container into which you bring all this reform effort all towards this recognition that meeting complex needs really demands that kind of an approach. Do I have one more, or is that the end? Yeah. Is this Hayin? Okay.
Good morning. My name's Hayin Kimner. I'm with the California Community Schools Learning Exchange, and I'm excited to be here and a little bit torn, right? There is a cognitive dissonance that is happening in this room from the way that the systems have been built. We talk about whole child. We spend a lot of time talking about the whole, how to make things whole across all of these disparate efforts, and oftentimes we lose sight of the child. I think about the canary in the coal mine, and a lot of times we spend a lot of our lives trying to figure out how do we best serve that canary in the coal mine. That canary in the coal mine is really our indicator that our systems are failing us. But if we spend all of our time really thinking about how do we do interagency collaboration, who's going to get the gas mask, who's going to deliver the gas mask to the canary, and we're not talking about, are we still talking about coal here? Why aren't we talking about renewable energy? So this is sort of the challenge of really thinking about the community schools opportunity in front of California right now. We have close to $3 billion that is talking about serving the canary. And there's cognitive dissonance right there, right? This is a group of the coalition of the willing in this room, and it's still really hard. We have no transformative incentive to change the conversation en masse as a collective powerhouse to make sure that this is not just about services. And we can't lose sight that the services are still important. So I'm not going to totally talk about this slide because you're going to hear about it in about, I don't know, 30 minutes or so. But I just wanted to offer up that really thinking about community schools as a funding stream, as an initiative, as pillars, as a framework, sort of belies the point. And when we're talking about implementation and we're talking about all those pieces, it's really about what's the why, right? I know I saw Ken Barrick here a little bit ago, but when I think about some of the pieces that have been so influential to me, it's this idea of mattering. So how is it that we are really taking those ideals and principles of mattering and not just having it for our young people and our communities and our families, but with each other? Can everyone in this room look across another table and say, I am valued and I am supported to be effective? Is that what drives our work together? The system does not give us the incentives to make that true. And it's really up to us, the coalition of the willing, to be able to move past the behaviors that we've been trained to do, to really think about imagining a new possibility. That has nothing really to do about the California Community Schools Partnership Program, but I think that's my point. This should not be about the initiative and the funding stream. This is about the larger North Star of it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Partnership.
Yes.
For the microphone.
Yes. Because again, not tech savvy. Not me.
Not me either.
I love those comments so much because what Hayin just talked about is community schools are, I think, kind of reading between the lines, community schools and that investment is a vehicle for change. It is not the end-all be-all, and that's kind of what I talked about earlier, too. There are lots of different other components that can be part of this and should be part of it. And that, if we can go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
And that kind of gets to what I was asked to talk a little bit about. So why cross-sector collaboration is so critical. And again, I touched on this morning, but you must have those shared goals and outcomes and accountability and risk. And then you have to have the shared leadership, the information sharing, the financing, and the community. So that's all lovely to say, right? It's all great for me to say, oh yeah, and we all need to work together and powwow and like be collaborative. But it's very different, right, in practice. And I think you all know that. But just I'll hit just on one of the bullets here, the importance of, and I briefly touched on it earlier today, but you're going to be asking people when you do this work, and I think everyone, I'm preaching to the choir here because almost everyone in the room I think has already started this work, and maybe many of you are even possibly farther along than we are in our own county office. But you're going to be asking people to come to the table with money, with financing, and that's necessary for sustainability. And if they're not at the table making decisions with you about what's going to be delivered and how it's going to be delivered and who's going to deliver it and where it's going to be delivered and all of the, and, you know, who's going to get the services and is everyone going to get everything, or are certain people going to get more, or are certain groups going to be prioritized? If those decisions are not made in a collaborative structure, where the folks that you're going to be asking for their partnership, their leadership, and their financing from, you're not going to be successful in the long term, right? So what I'm talking about right now as far as it relates to the guide, going back to the guide, which is what we're talking about today, is really contained in Appendix A of the guide, and also a little bit in Chapter 1, too. And if we can go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay.
I think I did.
Oh, great. So what we talk about in Appendix A and what we talk about a little bit in Chapter 1 is what are kind of the essential preconditions that must be established in order for you to have build a successful system, right? And I'll admit that you probably look at Santa Clara and you're like, oh yeah, you're pretty far along, things are going really well for you, but I have to admit that we look at kind of these preconditions, we revisit them regularly, and we have to admit that we still have to work on some of them. So we have a collaborative leadership structure, and everyone's at the table. We have our county behavioral health department. We have our managed care plans who have been amazing partners. You know, we have First Five. We have the Parks and Recs department. We have the libraries. We have all of these different groups, and of course all of the districts. But you know, getting their true buy-in and really creating a shared decision-making structure takes a lot of work and relationship building, and the trust in the relationship, as I talked about. I will also point out, as far as a precondition to success, one of the things, the commonalities I've noticed between various different counties that have long-standing successful structures are that they have a shared goal to address a specific issue. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. So one of my favorite examples is Monterey County and their collaboration with the County Office of Education, the County Health, and the County Behavioral Health Departments. And it doesn't make a lot of sense until you really sit down and think about it, but it all started with a federal grant that they received because they had noticed that there was much more gang violence and gang participation rates among children. And so they went after this federal grant that was about kind of working with your community and addressing gang violence. At the time, this was, I think, early 2000s. And they used that funding and they said, okay, well, what can we do that's really meaningful, that's going to address this issue? And they decided to work together with the County Behavioral Health Department to put behavioral health services in schools. So again, that's an example of a mission, a particular goal, a shared vision and issue that they wanted to work together to address. And that's really what inspired this long-standing partnership and relationship. Another good example is San Bernardino. Their collective impact effort, as I mentioned earlier, in large part, was started because businesses came to both County Behavioral Health, and the County Office of Education and said, we need a workforce. We want to expand. We have all these great businesses that want to come here, but we can't hire. It's not even just that we don't have folks to hire that are educated. We don't have folks to hire that are capable of the responsibility, that have the grit that we're looking for. We need to work together to address that. And so I think, looking at those commonalities, those shared, and the goals are going to be different in any community you're in, right? In our county, we were really motivated by the fact that we saw a extreme increase in student suicide rates in a really short period of time. That was extremely troubling to a lot of different people, including my boss, Dr. Marianne Dwan, that really just generated an outpouring of we have to work together. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, and that was even further inspiration. So that specific goal, the community buy-in to that goal, joint commitment to contribute and combine resources. As I mentioned, again, you have to have a really strong leadership structure for that to be possible. Creation of planning groups and teams that can execute the vision and kind of break down each one of you start with a big vision and then you break it down into pieces and then you break it down more and then you give it to teams to implement. Establishment of an organizing framework like I talked about earlier today, and then, of course, having that shared understanding and vision and common language. And if we can go to the last slide. So just really reminding folks that cross-sector collaboration, and I think Hayin talked about this far better than I possibly could, but that the overarching goal of all of it is to support the whole child and the whole family, and to learn from each other, to have expertise from each other. We don't all have to be experts in everything, right? That's part of the reason I love the chart that Chris showed earlier, which is I was kind of nodding and thinking to myself, well, I know 3 or 4 of those categories pretty well, like really well. But the other 2 I don't really know much about. I've kind of heard about in passing, and that's it. And nobody can know everything, right? So having that expertise, reducing duplication of services, and creating a more effective use of resources. So, you're not going to multiple different entities. One of the things we found when we sat down and talked within our county was that we had lots of different entities that were providing student mental health first aid, and yet people were coming to us and saying, well, we need this. And rather than deciding to do it ourselves, we said, well, maybe we can connect you with the existing resources. That's a much better use of the resources. Now we can use those resources we otherwise would have dedicated to that, to doing something else that is needed. And that really, at the end of the day, increases the potential funding that's available.
I think I'm actually going to go over there. A little easier for me to talk from here.
Sure.
Okay. I have about 5 minutes to tell you all about wellness centers in Placer County and really what wellness centers look like across the state. But before I start, what I want to say is this is one of the examples you'll find in the field guide. One of many, many examples. And someone said earlier, I think in this panel, or maybe it was Chris when she was talking, your work really matches the ecology of your county, right? So Fresno and their work in wellness centers will look different than Placer, or even within Placer, we have 3 different districts operating wellness centers, and it looks different. The part that I think is most important is to say that you cannot do this work alone. And sometimes from education, we think that collaboration is with the psychologists and school counselors, and we'll set up a wellness center. And at least in Placer from our perspective, the only way to do this work, and we have a 32-year collaboration with these fine people over here at table 5, is to do it through an interagency system of care. So what we're doing is we're deepening the system of care to create a place on campus. And immediately when we started to implement our wellness center program, we realized that's really the wrong name. What we want to do is create a wellness campus, and we use a multi-tiered systems approach. So how do we support kids and families and staff across an entire campus to try and change the ecology of the campus at both tiers 1, 2, and 3, right? We want to focus on helping to make services in the context of where students are at and helping to support both students and staff. We have some guiding principles. I'm not going to go over all of these. Hopefully many of them jump out at you, but we feel like wellness has to be at the center of what we're doing in a campus in order to break down those barriers for students to achieve and maintain their academic goals and be healthy. We want to respect both students and family, but one thing we learned very quickly is we need to respect educators on that campus, because when you implement something like this or when you operate within a system of care, we have different languages, different acronyms, different beliefs, different missions. So this is hard work. It's not easy for educators to understand what a mental health specialist does or a family liaison. It's also not easy sometimes for an LCSW or MFT to understand, well, what's the teacher's role? So there's a learning process that needs to happen. And you'll see that we need to do that within shared decision making. So we have, depending on the campus site, either weekly or biweekly meetings where we're looking at data, both universal data and individual data for students. Most important, I talked about this a little bit already, is that we have to maintain a collaborative approach to this work, and that includes our county and community providers. I'm pretty lucky. I was telling Twyla this morning that I really value that we've been part of a collaboration for so long, and that does make this work a lot easier. But you saw a great example from Carol Veras a few hours ago. Really picture-perfect job of installing collaboration, but maintaining that the partnership also has to include true family and student voices. So when we set up our wellness centers in Placer County, we have folks at each school site that are called mental health specialists. So those are LCSW or MFT licensed, pre-licensure kind of people. We also have family youth liaisons. So we hired people with lived experience to be on campus, to be part of the team, part of the decision-making team, but also help engage with our families, help bring students into the wellness center, create a sense of trust. And these folks do everything from setting up gardens to running groups to going out into the community and helping families understand that they're safe places to be. Lastly, a little bit about our data. The top number I think is most impressive. Yeah, you guys can kind of see that. We've done 41,000 services. I don't see Toby over there, but I was going to give him a big shout out to the OAC for helping to fund this project. But we've had on our universal services, 41,000 events that happened. Crisis, I think that says 560, and then over 1,000 individual contacts. And this means ongoing services to kids, so more of a clinical or therapeutic. If you've done this work for a while, game changer for students. The activities are happening where students are at. And that's my time.
I'll be incredibly quick because there's going to be some opportunity to discuss what you've heard today. But I'm really excited to share this one graphic really in this exhibit, and it it sort of depicts back to, we started with sort of, these are the initiatives, and then we went, and you heard specific on-the-ground work and amazing work that's happening with different examples of how it's done. And what I wanted to share here is this graphic really depicts the various initiatives that provide or increase access to and the connections between each other. So professional development and training, integrated workforce, governing structures, partnerships and collaborations, and services to students by all those initiatives. But it's sort of a mini mapping of sorts. So if you know, you're looking for how to integrate, collaborate, and streamline, this is a really, you know, easy sort of picture to look at and see how much of which is really concentrated in each of these areas. And I just wanted to share that with you because within Chapter 2 and within each of the actual initiatives, we go into the connections that they share between each other. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And now I think we're going to turn it over to Chris for the discussion.
We want to make sure you get a little bit of a break before the next presentation, just because you did just eat lunch and it's good to get up and walk around. But we want to take maybe 5 minutes just to hear from you. One, where are you on this journey? What information would be helpful as we roll out the field guide? Hopefully you got at least a little glance of it as we passed it around the room. Are there any particular next steps you'd want to see? So, out to you.
I'm just going to add a thought, and then I would love reflections. So, my experience, I don't know if all of you know, I'm also an attorney for the public schools in California, so I do a lot of wellness center development, wellness continuum development. We work with districts all over the state of California. Before that, I was a child welfare attorney representing minors, which is actually what brought me to this work, was seeing the disconnect between the systems in trying to serve the same children at the same time. And so since then, we've been doing this work of integrating and cross-pollinating our efforts and our resources and our supports for the children and families we serve, with the children and families we serve. And so, but what I have seen is that when I say we're doing the work upstream, I feel like we are, and someone mentioned that earlier, like this is sort of, I think it was Hayin who said, this work isn't really the work that's sort of incentivized or supported by the initiatives that come down to us or by the funding streams that come down to us. And so I'm wondering if people share that experience. And if so, I've been trying to encourage the state to think about providing support to the field to actually be doing this sort of work versus us catching all this stuff and then trying to reorganize it at the local level. So I'm just wondering if those of you who are here, who are sort of dedicated to this work, who want to learn about it, whether you're far along and you've been here every year, or I just met some people who've just been here. This is their first year. Like, what would it be helpful? Would that be helpful? Because as you look at the field guide, do you think to yourself what I think I would think to myself as an attorney representing the schools is, I'm never going to read that thing. Like, I don't have time to read that, right? Like, I don't have time to read the 1,000 things that are coming at us. But I might have time to have someone come help me digest what's in there and try and work through it with my own county and my own local area. So I'm just curious whether people think that would be helpful in the field. Yes? By show of hands, if so. Like that would be sort of helpful support to people out in the field. And how many of you are like, we've got this down, like we got this. Dude, Elizabeth, we've got this. Nobody. Okay. Well, that's good for me to know too. That's okay, because it's fluid, right? So we're going to keep going.
Look, we have the MFTs and the LCSWs and, all the expertise, but can't apply for the grants because the monies are going to the schools and the districts. And so, we're always trying to partner and be creative and break down the barriers, right? But if we could, yeah, like this, I think this conversation's good. I think the guide is great, and I'm definitely going to use it. And my head was going, okay, well, this is great to go over with the school districts that we work with. And should I make them aware of this guide? Because
Yes.
I think they would really find this useful, right? So just, you know, some comments, I think, you know, and doing the work for 17 years, this is kind of where we're getting stuck as an organization.
Richard, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, so thank you. And I suspect that's a universal experience of a community-based organization, is how do you influence the local policymakers who decide where the dollars come out of Sacramento or Washington? My only reflection is, I think that process often has to be, well, there are formal processes, things like the mental health services triennial planning in every county. You have a number of vehicles like that in various sectors where you can have a formal voice, where the county agency is obligated to listen to you, right, as a community stakeholder. More important than that, though, I think, and I learned this lesson in Placer too, is that the informal relationships you have with those people are priceless, right? Not to wield influence in a direct or unethical way, but breakfast and lunch, those informal conversations where you can update them on your challenges and they can share theirs to the extent that they can with you. Those are super powerful conversations where you kind of build the trust and break down the interpersonal barriers, and you raise awareness collectively about what the community public-private partnership needs in your local system. So look at your calendar. Everybody eats breakfast and or lunch, right? Schedule it out with a partner. If we're done with the pandemic now, then let's get back into social ecologies where we can really share, right?
I would also say, like, coming back to the Calaveras presentation and their interagency leadership team, and sort of like the fact that that infrastructure exists and now more things are coming to it, I feel like for community-based organizations, having an opportunity to be at that table and have those conversations about how it's going, what you need, you know, I find that initiatives come out and we're trying to do this work in education. Now I work in education. I used to work in social services. But we're trying to do this work, and we're actually, there might be someone else in the community who's already literally doing the work that we're now getting $12 billion to do. So, I mean, the time has never been more important than now for all of us with these allocations that the state is pushing out, which are largely one-time dollars, to figure out how we're going to unite our resources around a set of shared goals, including all the CBOs and whatnot. So that there is a leadership structure that's necessary there to bring that information into the funnel, right, so that we can then have shared goals and execute on those.
I think one other piece is to lean into harder conversations and some self-reflection. I think what the system incentivizes are transactions. You're the expert, so I'm going to send all of the things that I don't know anything about to you as the expert. Now you as the expert are accountable to expert things, and I'm not accountable for them. So what are we holding ourselves accountable to? As whole child providers, as the coalition of the willing, are our mental health providers willing to hold accountability for student outcomes? Where is there any incentive for that to happen? For our education system, is there any incentive to hold the education system accountable for family well-being? How is it that we can start to model that? The incentives are not going to come until we actually demonstrate that there's a way to have shared accountability that isn't just, we're all accountable for young people's success. That's not what the reporting is. So how do we start to own some of these harder conversations about what we're actually willing to be held accountable for? Because that is the piece that nobody likes to talk about, because it's a lot easier to blame somebody else for not doing their job, because we've done our job.
Yep. The idea over here, for those of you who can't hear it, is it would be great if the state could support the development and funding of like an interagency, position that sits in every single county in the state. And actually, it aligns with something that I've been talking about, which is some of the work of the National Interoperability Collaborative is they created an interoperability training. It's literally a training, like a certification training. But that led to a conversation around, is there an interoperability specialist that we could have in every county in the state of California and like make that their role versus it sort of being the side job of everybody to do this work, which is really where we are. We're the coalition of the willing, which is amazing, and you guys like literally make me cry every day because of that. But yeah, so I love that idea. Yeah, it's probably a whole team, which I've suggested it be a team, an interdisciplinary team. Okay, we're gonna.
Thought, Elizabeth,
yeah.
On this topic, which is really important, I want to just. I'm often in front of the line to criticize the state. Those of you who know me, but I will say that I'm seeing. I think we're all seeing evidence for change here.
I told you, technology hates me. It hates me.
I mean, the Mental Health Services Act, by its very definition, is intended to break silos and barriers, right? So that's fantastic. But if you haven't seen it and you're interested, look at the latest all-county letter. Child welfare and probation authorities around Family First Prevention Services Act planning. The state has acknowledged in at least 3 different places in that all-county letter that you can't do FFPSA without your behavioral health and your school partners. So the state, I think there's a will and an awareness, at least presently in Sacramento, that the dollars and the policy and the guidance have to come together. So they're trying to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Largely because all of you are doing this work and here, and so I think there is that interest in noticing at the state level.